Welcome back to another episode of Quarter Horse Customs. Today we are going to introduce every part in our 387 stroker rebuild. From the block, crank, pistons, bearings, heads, cam, rocker arms, push rods, gaskets, timing chain, timing cover, intake, distributor, plugs, wires, harmonic balancer. Every single part on this table I'm going to cover today. So here we go. First thing we're going to start with is our 351 Windsor block. We decided to go with a roller block, as you can tell by the bosses here, for the spider to lay in to hold the lifters in place to keep them from spinning sideways and eating your cam. The easiest way to tell whether it's a roller block is actually by the exhaust. They'll have the same part number on the side of the factory exhaust as it does on the side of the block, but I'll show you the side of the block here. So to tell what you have, you can look here, F4 space E. There's usually a T here on the exhaust manifold. It will say F4TE, and that tells you that that block is a roller block. Now, you can build a 387 stroker out of a flat tappet engine. That was not what I wanted to do because roller cams were just a little bit easier to do, and they were a lot more accessible compared to the flat tappet cams with reliability during the whole COVID thing. So we chose a roller cam block out of a 95 Bronco with 215,000 miles on it. Now we got really lucky when we originally pulled this apart. Our cylinder walls looked really great and didn't have a lip right here. Took it to the machine shop. They measured it out. Everything was okay. So all we did is, we did a hone with just a cheap Amazon dingleberry hone. We cleaned the block ourselves with pressure washer and a lot of degreaser and brake clean. And then we had to go through and clearance the block to fit the stroker itself, which really wasn't too bad. It was just making sure we had enough clearance. And we'll cover that as we assemble it. I'll show you exactly what is needed the clearancing for. But you can see right here on each one of these cylinders has a little notch taken out, except for right here. This whole tunnel right here had to be ground down. But this goes nowhere. As long as you're not getting close to this bolt here, you don't have to worry about this because it's just a dead hole that goes to nothing. It's not an oiling pump hole or anything. But we had to make this notch across every single one of our cylinders. So all we did to make those reliefs was a little carbide titanium little bit here. Pretty aggressive bite to that little guy. Just an air tool. I know I don't have the chuck in there right now, but I'm not using it. And then you just come in, and as you assemble it, you're going to take your crank and slowly spin it around with one rod at a time, and you're going to see where it's going to hit. Other than that, absolutely nothing here in the bottom was needed to be clearanced at all. And nothing self-clearanced either. So that's really good. We did have new freeze plugs put in and new cam bearings all the way through. Just because, $50, peace of mind, really good chance to do it. But after a little bit of hard work, you can make a really nice, clean 351 Windsor block. And I've already gotten 150 miles off this rebuild before we had a catastrophic bearing failure on rod number 6 that we later figured out was due to a mix-up in a part. When we initially rebuilt it, we got in a little bit too much of a rush, and we accidentally put a bimetal bearing in along with all of our tri-metals, and we had a little bit of a detonation issue. So if you're going to do this build, I would recommend using some tri-metal bearings. Come on. If you're building this, you're probably not going to put it in your truck to drive around like a grandpa. You're probably going to have some fun with this thing because this is a really fun motor. And it's got a lot of power for what it is. So we're going to start from mostly the bottom up. So we got the block here, and we use this crankshaft from Eagle. It's not forged, it's just a regular crankshaft, but it's stroked. The part number for it, I kind of have it written down. It got ripped a little bit, but that's the part number for it. You can get it on Summit. I think it's $400 now. And here's what she looks like. Now, when you do get this crank, you will have to do a couple things. One, you'll have to balance it. And along with balancing, you'll probably have to have a harmonic balancer and a flywheel setup that stays with this crankshaft, because I've seen twice now between mine and Neo Mustang's crankshaft, both ended up having to have the harmonic balancer and flywheel added a little bit of weight to them to help balance out the whole thing, because this is a pretty big crankshaft here. But other than the rod bearing failure, which was not any fault of the crankshaft or of the build, it was my fault for not double checking the part. It is awesome so far. So I've only ran the car a couple times, but we had some clutch issues and obviously a bearing issue, but we ran a 1203 in a Fox body. So next we're going to cover the pistons. And the pistons, a lot of people freak out, what pistons to use. I personally recommend using Fox body pistons out of an 86 to I believe 89 forged pistons. So they'll have down on the bottom here, might be a little hard to see, down on the bottom we'll have a E7TE down in there. It's really hard to see, but you can kind of see the difference in how that looks. Now on a non-forged Fox body piston, it'll look like this down inside. So it's kind of got a lip in there, and you can really see the sand pitting compared to, a nice smooth look. Now I know this one has a little bit of oil in there, but it's still a lot smoother compared to the cast piston. Now there's a couple different places they have it. I believe every single piston will have it on the inside, E7TE, right down in there. Some of them will also have it across the top here. Not all of them though. Obviously that one doesn't. So what we did is we took a 351 Windsor rod, aka the football rods. As you can see, there kind of looks like a football. A little bit, kind of maybe, right there on the head of this bolt. They are quite bigger than your normal 302 rod. Quite a bit. So we took the piston off here with a press, and that gives you just your piston. So we didn't end up using these because obviously we put different pistons on. So we took our pistons and our rods to the machine shop and said, hey, so this is the crank we're using. Here's our harmonic balancer, here's our flywheel, and here's our pistons and rods we're going to use. So he went ahead and used the specialized tools to heat them up and put them on the rods, and then he balanced all of the pistons and connecting rod ends to the crankshaft to make sure it's a balanced rotating assembly, which, I think it was like $350, $400, so not terrible. You're in it for the bottom end. Takes a little bit of money to get going, but compared to a lot of the other strokers, it is not that bad. However, a lot of things that they don't cover is on the bottom of your pistons. One of the sides here is clearanced just a little bit. That one didn't need it. Due to being a stroker, like right here, we had to take a little bit out of right there. That side was fine, but this side right here needed a little bit of the notch taken out of the skirt. Again on this side. That was to clear the counterbalances of the 387 crankshaft, which we'll cover that and show you exactly where on the next video when we actually put the crankshaft, pistons, rods into the engine. And as far as upgrading the bottom end, we did go with ARP main bolts. I know a lot of people say the main bolts in the bottom of the 351 are fine, but I wanted to replace them because they are torque to yield, and because of how much power we are making, and we do plan on hitting this with nitrous, we went ahead and put in some bigger ARP bolts. It was a little bit of money, really not that much, but the added security is a lot better. One more thing that was not covered by a lot of people when doing this was the piston to valve clearance issues with running a bigger head. We did have our valves fly cut here. You can see right here, a lot bigger than right here on the stock piston. Yes, they have stock valve reliefs, but they are nowhere near big enough for a large head. So we had, right here was clearanced, and right here was clearanced by fly cutting. So that is one thing you might want to keep in mind when doing this build. If you're planning on running a large head, you're probably going to have to fly cut them. And also, might let you run a little bit bigger of a cam because it does take away a little bit of surface. But you got to remember, if you try to do it yourself, you cannot go too deep. If you go too deep on the fly cutting, you pretty much ruin the integrity of the piston because it's only so thick. So if you can find somebody who's done it before, you know, an old timer who builds small block Fords, that's what I did. We found a good guy who's been building small block Fords and big block Fords for so long he actually sold the car to my dad, who got my dad into Fox bodies, who intended getting me in Fox bodies. So he knows a thing or two or thing or three about how to build a small block Ford. So if you find somebody like that, they can probably hook you up for a good deal on getting that done. So while we're right here talking about bearings, these are the bearings that I'm going to be using since I had to have my crankshaft ground 20 thousandths. So I'm using Clevite P series. They are a tri-metal. These are 20 thousandths under. If you're going to use a Clevite P series on the stock crankshaft, well, the original crankshaft before it's ground, that's the part number. Just take away the -20, and that should give you the part number for a 351 Windsor connecting rod bearing. That's tri-metal. If you're planning on doing a lot of racing, I would look into the Clevite H series. That's what I originally wanted to have for this, but due to availability issues and time issues, specifically that I now have 2 weeks to have this all put back together, running and driving to go to the racetrack, I just went ahead and went with the P series. We also went with P series main bearings. Here's the part number for those. Again, these are 20 thou under. So if you're going to use those, make sure to take the 20 off the end because you do not want 20 thou under. That is going to put your clearances way, way too tight. Some other parts we used, we did not ARP our oil pump bolts. We're just reusing the same bolts, so you can save a few bucks there. We're not running a high volume oil pump or anything fancy like that. We're just running a nice Melling M83. It's like 50 bucks from your local parts store or Amazon. I believe I got it from Amazon originally. We did upgrade our oil pump shaft to the ARP version. I know the 351 Windsor one is pretty stout, but again, for 20 bucks, that's just a little bit of added security to make sure something doesn't happen. The pickup tube is going to be specific to what oil pan you use, so whatever setup you run, you'll have to find a pickup tube that fits your build. I don't exactly have the part number for this because I think I got really lucky and actually found the exact one I needed for my oil pan I got off a buddy of mine on the parts rack on clearance at Summit. So you'll have to find an oil pickup specific to what you did for an oil pan. Biggest, most annoying parts of this entire build was trying to figure out what camshaft to use. What is going to fit with the piston to valve? What's going to fit with my heads? What's going to fit with just the entire combination? You know, I want something that's going to be for race because I'm building a drag motor. So a lot of people throw out there, you know, buy a custom grind comp cams. Well, that's just not in my budget. When I say budget, you know, I'm trying to keep it, you know, $300-400 bucks for a camshaft. So I did some talking to some people, finding what people recommend, looking into some Trick Flow, Summit cams, some comp cams. What I ended up settling on was a Summit brand cam. It's 8900. I have printed off the cam card if you want to see the specs. Mainly chose this cam because it is damn near close to the Trick Flow Stage 2. But initially, with a rocker arm of 1.6 ratio, the lift was only around 550 to 540 at 50 thousandths tappet lift. So that kind of gave me a really good position to start for piston to valve if I ever want to upgrade the cam. Now, this cam does have specs to use 1.7 rockers, which can take it up a lot. So if I have the clearance, which I do, I can upgrade this camshaft without having to change the camshaft to get a little bit more duration and a little bit more lift out of this cam. It brings it up into, don't quote me, but I believe the 570s, 560s, which makes for a really healthy cam. And this car really likes this cam, so I'm not going to argue with it. Next thing we got, you know, budget build. We originally were going to use a set of heads that we have sitting over here. We were originally going to use these. These were on my wife's engine in a car that she picked up, and we found out the bottom end was just completely trashed. So we ended up rebuilding her a 289 hypo, thanks to my dad. And so I may have stolen them. Well, not stolen, but strategically transferred equipment to an alternate location, aka my 306 that I had in my red Mustang. But as soon as I took these off to put these on this engine, someone decided that she was going to claim dibs back on them for her 302 turbo build that we're getting ready to do. So in return, she was nice enough to buy me some cheap budget 185 AFR heads. These are the Enforcer versions. They're not the Renegades. They're not the top dollar. They were like $600 at Summit. I think they might be like $650 now. But I really like them. They look great. They flow really good for what they are. They're a really good budget. They already come with ARP studs for the rocker arms. They come with the guide plates, springs, valves, all installed. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me to pick these heads. And they've worked really well with my combination so far. I have a lot of fun with it. We did go with a set of Trick Flow 1.6 roller rockers. And the only reason we went with Trick Flow was because we found a deal for them on Face Space. Somebody had bought a set from Summit that was on sale, and they didn't fit his application. He needed pedestal mount, and we needed stud mount, so I bought them off of him for less than what he paid for from Summit, or for what he paid for at Summit. And they were exactly what I wanted, 1.6 roller rockers. They had the full roller, and they're the extruded aluminum. Be careful when looking at rocker arms, because you can get these guys really cheap. And see how they look a little different? So this guy here is out of extruded aluminum. He's got a little bit different shape, and he's going to be stronger than this guy who's made out of cast aluminum. Now, let's be honest, again, you know, a lot of you fellas are probably going to do a little bit of racing, whether it be on the track or the street, or, you know, showing off to your buddy. So I would recommend not going with the cast guys, just because if this guy breaks and drops all those needle bearings in the bottom of the engine, you're going to be right here with me rebuilding your 387. So go ahead, you know, whether it's Summit brand, Jags brand, get a set of roller rockers. You can get the steel version for cheaper, which I'm actually going to end up going to steel. It's just, at the time, I found a great deal on those, so I jumped on them. For lifters, I know they don't look like it, but these are just factory reman lifters. They're actually out of my red Mustang, again. I'm not reusing the stock lifters that came out of the Windsor, because I obviously had a bearing failure, so there's probably a bunch of junk that's inside those lifters that I didn't want, so I went ahead and stole these out of my other 302. One thing you are going to have to measure is your piston to deck height, because my pistons came out of the hole about 0.01, so I had to run a thicker head gasket. I got some Cometics. They were a little pricey. They're $80 a piece, so that puts you up a little bit, but for planning on running nitrous with them, it really wasn't that big of a deal. So I don't have the part number for those on hand right now, but I can go ahead and post those in the comments if somebody would like them. You know, just say, hey, can I get a, you know, let me know what those were, and I'll go ahead and tell you. Push rods, you are going to have to measure your push rod length based on your engine, whether it was decked, not decked. I do believe mine was decked before I got it, because it was, somebody had freshly been into it, but they had a valve burn up, so they took it to the junkyard and called it a day. The push rods that I ended up getting are just a cheap Summit brand. They were SUM-1457800. They're 5/16 push rods in the diameter. They were 7.800 inches long to get everything rolling where I needed to with the valve tips. So next we got, you know, generic spider, you know, comes in all your roller blocks. If you don't have a roller block, you're not going to have a spider. You can retrofit some of the older blocks, but that is an entirely other subject if you want to get into it. Another thing I did do to upgrade the motor a little bit, I spent $100 on some rocker arm girdles. I mean, I was running the 3/8 studs instead of 7/16, so they're a little smaller, but they were what was in the head. I found a good deal on rocker arms. For $100, make sure they don't flex and break. That was worth it to me. They're just the cheap, I believe they're Speedmaster. They do all right. They were a little finicky when torquing them down, so I just kind of went until they were tight. A little bit of Loctite on them. Other than that, not really that big budget breaking. If you do it, great. If you don't do it, you don't have to. However, one thing that we really did go up on is we did get ARP head studs. We decided that since we're going to be running nitrous, and this is a high compression motor, I'm running like 12.9 to 1 right now due to my piston to deck height. So that might be something, whether it's ARP bolts or ARP studs, something you might want to just look into a little bit. I mean, if you choose not to, that is completely up to you. This is just what I personally did. For timing cover, we ended up using the original timing cover that came on the engine. However, if you are not going to run an electric fuel pump and you plan on running a mechanical fuel pump, you need to get one that has a provision for it here on the side. This one does not. In case you're wondering what the provision looks like, here it is on my 302. This right here is where your fuel pump will mount up to run in off the eccentric on the cam. So it goes whop, 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 pumps for fuel. Some of the hardware that we didn't replace was, the cam thrust plate bolts. Those are all original. The cam retainer bolts original. Our timing cover bolts, we just reused on them because, why not? Some of them were modified. Obviously, I have my alternator bracket bolt here. It was lengthened to fit the alternator bracket I chose because I just went with a generic Evil Bay kit. It's a little longer. The 302 ones won't work. I tried, didn't work. Here's a 302 one that we had laying around. It is quite shorter than the 351 Windsor one. It wasn't that expensive, but if you run factory brackets, you don't have to worry about that. But I deleted power steering pump, deleted AC. All I ran was an alternator and water pump, so I went with a custom bracket. For intake, we really did not break the bank on this. We just got a generic Speedmaster intake from Amazon, and for the $200 we paid for this thing is actually pretty nice. She has got some nice ports. She breathes very well. The ports are actually just a little bit bigger than the intake ports on the head, but I've talked to a few people. Some say, that lip there could cause some issues. Some people say, hey, that lip there will actually help atomize on the fuel. It really depends on who you talk to. I left it alone because I didn't want to pop all the valves out of the head, just to grind a little bit off because it was very minute. Intake gaskets, again, we really didn't break the bank on them, but we did go with some Felpros. Here's a part number for those. I really like them because they're made out of this nice material that doesn't stick to the head and make it insanely ridiculous to get off. So those are really nice. Don't forget, throw away on those stupid cork things. Those never work. Just toss them in the trash. Use RTV on the China wall. They did, however, again, here's that part number, 1262. My wife would like to remind you guys not to use the 1262Rs. Those were way different and did not work. Take these guys and, throw those away. Right here on the coolant passage, so some heads will line up with this, and some need this cut out. You can go ahead and take a razor blade, just, cut this out to fit your head. Just make sure this outer blue stays intact. You don't want to cut that. Anything on the inside of that, like right here, you can cut right across there. Cut this guy out here. Cut around here. Just leave that outer blue on there because that's what really helps seal it. We really broke the bank on our intake studs. These are the cheapest intake studs I could find that were long enough. I can put the part number in the comments if you would like to get them. The only reason I went with these is we were having issues due to our valve cover breathers being wrong, blowing the China wall seal out at the back of the engine. And I was getting sick and tired of every time I ran the car having to undo the bolts and reline them up, mess up the gaskets, shift them. So I just spent 20 bucks, got some studs, and I would do it again on the next motor I build, aka wife's turbo build coming up. You guys will watch that video too. It'll be coming up sometime this winter. Exhaust gaskets. Now, I ran BBK headers for a Fox body. They were actually 302 headers. Yes, on a 351 Windsor. I made them work. So, these are the gaskets I use. I got them from Jegs. They might not work for your setup, based on what exhaust you use. But, if you can read that part number there. They were like 30 bucks. Not really bad. Now we get into some of the fun stuff. Use it if you want. If you don't want to use it, it's up to you. So for harmonic balancer, I went ahead and got the Summit brand SFI, high performance racing. This is part number SUM-C4269. Again, if you can see right there, it's a little different between the sides from here to over here. It was machined to be the counterbalance for the crankshaft, specific to my crankshaft. So that SFI balancer will stay with the 387 stroker until there is no longer a 387 stroker to beat. With the flywheel, again, we really broke the bank. You know, cheapest harmonic balancer, so we went with the cheapest SFI flywheel. This was a Pro Comp flywheel, 28 ounce. Again, the harmonic balancer is also 28 ounce. It is a 28 ounce imbalance on the crankshaft, so something you want to keep in mind. If you don't use an SFI version, if you're not racing it, you're still going to need a 28 ounce imbalance. But because I am racing and I prefer to keep my feet in case something happens, went with the SFI. This one was SDM-PCE229-1009. It was like $180. I mean, it works great. Love it. Haven't had any issues with it. Clutch might have had an issue. So originally, when we built the car, I was going cheap. I went with the cheapest damn stock clutch we could get from, I believe, AutoZone. Yeah. So if you're street driving the car, you're you're okay, because I'm running a T5 in the Fox. It was doing all right. But if you try to launch this car with any power, that clutch is going to laugh at you, and laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. So I did go ahead and borrow another clutch from my father. We'll be upgrading that. Just for now, I need to upgrade the whole thing. You know, I'm only running a T5 behind this because this is entirely a budget build. But back to engine parts. Again, we did use some ARP flywheel bolts just because the added security, you know, we are putting a lot of torque through here. So we went ahead and upgraded on those. Exhaust bolts, the only reason we upgraded those, we got, I think they were either ARPs or JEG knockoffs, but they have a really nice small bolt head. Yeah, these are ARPs, but it makes it really nice to put your exhaust bolts on with those nice small heads. So if you got headers, you might want to snag on some of them. Bell housing bolts, you know, cheap, you know, grade 8s. That doesn't go to here yet. Grade 8s. Those are all for underneath the car, so you don't have to worry about any of those. Starter was just a cheap O'Reilly's, you know, 93, you know, late F-150, 302, 351. It's got the solenoid on the side, so it's a little smaller for the exhaust. I put some heat wrap on there. Just having some starter issues, but found out it might have been using way too small of a battery. For distributor, we really didn't break the bank. I didn't want to run a stock distributor because I'd have to change the cam gear. No, it is not an MSD. Thanks to my dad having some random parts laying around. It looks like an MSD, but it is actually a, I believe, Pro Comp. PCE there. But it did have the roller cam gear already on there, so that was saving me a couple bucks with the roller cam by getting this distributor. It does not have a vacuum advance, so if you're just doing street driving, you might want to find, you know, something different, whether it's a stock camshaft and swap the gear. But I'm racing, so I really didn't want the vacuum advance, wasn't going to use it. I think this was under $100, and I can give you the part number for that. That part number was 746 minus PCE 376110401. I got it from JEGS. It did not break the bank whatsoever. I did spend a little bit of money and got the Ford Racing plug wires because, I mean, come on. Red and black in this engine looked great. Valve covers, we already had them laying around on maybe my wife's old engine. Might have stolen them. Might not have. Yeah, they're mine now. She's not taking them back. No. Just cheap grade 8s. We might put some valve cover studs in eventually, but we'll get there. If you are going to use an aftermarket valve cover and you're going to run a carbureted setup, I would go ahead and make sure you get one of these style valve cover breathers. The regular style actually caused a lot of back pressure in the engine. It was blowing out the back of the China wall and cost me a lot of headaches. A lot of wasted time. So just, snag on one of them guys with there, throw a hose on it, run it inside your frame rail or down to your exhaust, something, get it out of the way. And then a lot of this stuff, just that goes to the car. We don't need to worry about that. Just a generic Summit Racing valve cover breather. Now I will cover my crank pulleys and setup. So because of the way it was in my Mustang, and I only ran an alternator water pump, I decided to cheat. Instead of buying the $200 or $150 ribbed water pump pulley, this is actually off of a 2.3 liter Mustang. It's got the ribs on there, and it was working great until I realized that it doesn't exactly line up with the water pump. So I went ahead and I was running this underdrive setup, and it wasn't lining up. I just needed just a little bit. And these are what spacers they would be. So you put your ring, there's this little snap ring that goes in these slots, and that's what the spacing would be. This centers in there, and it helps center your pulley here. And then if you need it spaced, you put the little ring on there and it spaces it outwards. Well, for the spacing I needed, that didn't cover it, so I needed something like this. See how small that is? So what this actually is a junk crank pulley. See how it's kind of oblonged there? So I originally just cut it down myself, and it was really crappy looking. I'll post a picture right here. Yeah, didn't like that. It could, throw off the balance of the engine. So I got a hold of a buddy of mine. I was like, hey man, would you mind taking this to work or something? Or if you have a tool, grind this down, make it nice and centered. That way it doesn't throw the counterweight off. And he's like, yeah, no problem. So big shout out to him, saving on future bearings there. Don't need a rebuild. Thank you. And one thing we did spend a little bit of money on, only because I was having a really hard time finding a mechanical secondary carburetor. My wife let me buy a Brawler 750 carburetor. We did all the math. The 750 is what the car needed for the engine, so I went with a 750. This Brawler, I love it. Man, it was basically put it on, do just a little bit of tuning, and she purred. And she runs great. So, and the black and red, don't know if you see a little bit of a theme here. No, me neither. Maybe a little bit. But it looks really good. And just kind of set it off. But if you're going for a budget, go ahead and grab, off Faceplace, or, find a buddy or a guy, he might have one laying around. If you're doing a street build, go ahead and get a vacuum secondary. Save on the fuel, because this thing loves to drink. Well, I do believe that is mostly everything besides SFI bell housing, but that's really not specific to the build for just the engine. So this is everything we used. Thank you. I hope. Oh man, you know what? Here we go. We did forget something. So to save on some couple bucks, I found this part number here. I guess I'll flip it around so you guys can read it. This part number here. It's called a bottom end kit for gaskets. And for like 30 bucks off Amazon, it comes with your oil pan gasket, a water pump gasket, a inner water pump gasket, your front main seal, and a rear main seal, oil pan drain plug, and whatever that thing is. It says on the front of the box. Probably oil pickup tube. Yep. Thank you, love. 30 bucks. Most of the time, this gasket alone is more than 30 bucks. So that is a great deal. Wish I would have found that the first time I built this engine. That could have saved on a couple dollars. But that now, I officially believe, is everything we used to build this motor. All right, now that that's covered, that's going to wrap this video up. This is everything I used in my 387 build. We are going to get ready to clean the block up and start assembling, which you will see in the next video here on Quarter Horse Customs. So thank you. If you need any questions or something I didn't cover, go ahead and drop it down in the comments. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I know my wife will read every single comment posted on there. So you will definitely get attention. We will try to help you. So thank you. I appreciate you watching the video. And I hope this helps you get your 387 assembled and out there on the road. And you never know, maybe I'll see you at the track. Thank you, and have a good day.